All right. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. It's Bob Weathers here at the Vitality Project with my dear friend, Michael Morar. Really appreciate Michael joining me as a guest tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Michael's operating on a 2-hour difference than me, so we're going to keep this lean and clean. I'm in Southern California, and Michael's in Southern Texas, and here we are. It's great to connect with you, brother. Our topic for tonight, Michael, is part of a series that we're doing on Guy du Plessis' book with Stan Block on the Mind-Body Workbook for Addiction and Recovery. And Guy and I are working right now on a revised edition of that. And so it's given me an opportunity to immerse myself in this material and try to pull out nuggets that make sense to me. Some don't. And so I try not to like, I don't know how this goes for you as a psychotherapist. I don't like doing stuff that doesn't make sense to me or doesn't work for me. I never was good at that. I just, just
I don't see how anybody,
yeah. You can kind of feel when somebody's going through the emotions, and I don't like how that feels, and I don't like how it feels to be the one doing that. So this thing tonight is dicey because the topic is how to not get caught in negativity, and that could turn into a cutesy platitude in about a nanosecond. I know you, Michael, to know that that's probably not a huge risk in our conversation tonight. I'll tell you just as a quick entree, and then we'll go where we go with this in the next few minutes. I've been fiddling with this idea that's right at the core of this mind-body bridging that Guy and Stanley Block have developed, which is what's it like to pair a relaxed body, and for that matter, a relaxed brain. What's it like to pair that in an otherwise stressful circumstance? And we've been looking, I'm trying to integrate their language in this, is that when I go down a rabbit hole of negativity, which I have and do and will, is what difference does it make to be able to step back from the canvas, so to speak, and just chill for a minute, And we've been using mindful awareness practice, 5 minutes of focusing on your breath, as just one way to do that. It could just as well be a million other things, but that's what we've been using. And I'd kind of like to talk into that in terms of any experience you've had as a meditator, as an athlete, as a scholar, as a husband, as a friend. I mean, just literally anything. And just to go with that for a minute, it feels so common sense, but I want to root it in something that feels common sense rather than something that feels abstract and kind of put on and manually. I don't want to be manually tonight.
No manualizing?
No manualizing tonight. There will be no manualizing tonight.
Well, I guess I'll get rid of my CBT then.
Oh man, we're up the creek. Yeah. What Michael and I are talking about is that the evolution, since I got it began when I was in graduate school. There was no cognitive behavioral therapy before I was in graduate school, and what's happened is that the insurance companies and the psychiatric and psychological establishments have moved towards evidence-based therapy. It isn't a bad thing. It's nice to do therapy where you're not just pulling it out of your posterior, but it's turned into lots of people generating manuals. This began for me. I remember in the 80s, people began to generate manuals. Here's what you do with anxiety disorders. Here's what you do with depression. And soon enough, it was a one-size-fits-all thing. And those are called manuals. And this is called manualized evidence-based treatment. And as they say in German, it's verrückt, which I'm not going to translate right now. It's not a good word. It's
an F word.
Yeah, it's an F word. Yeah, it's really problematic. I don't meet any client that's a statistic any more than you and I are, Michael. So that's what we mean by there will be no manual labor tonight.
Yeah. Well, and so Bob, before I answer, I mean, something does come to mind just kind of in what you said so far, but I did notice that you situated the negativity, I think, or the potential for negativity within a storyline, or is that right?
Yeah, working out of this theory that Stan and Guy have developed, it'd be close to what we might think of as a kind of like a narrative, and they're kind of subliminal narratives. Like, you know, if you ask a client, Michael, and you know this from your own experience, and I certainly over these years, you can ask a client, "Do you feel shame, Michael?" And most clients will say, "No, I don't."
Right.
It's as the psychoanalysts call it, it's like the unthought known. You can feel it in your bones, but you can't say a word about it. You can't even articulate it mentally. And so it's kind of like that around these narratives. And so what I'm thinking in terms of negativity, at least this is my experience, certainly matches my clinical experience, that something can happen in the outer world or the inner, something can happen in interaction, let's say, with our respective significant others. And I can move from 0 to 60 into some kind of negative thing, a negative self-attribution or a negative other attribution, and be off pieces. And that's a work in progress across a lifetime. But that's what I mean by negativity. There's like a narrative. Narrative isn't always so accessible as that would sound like. Like I can narrate my narrative. Maybe this is much more kind of under the surface, more subliminal, as I say. That's what I was thinking, Michael. And you can go with it wherever you're imagining is just fine with me.
Yeah. Well, I like situating things within storylines or stories, because that's, I mean, usually people show up, or even if we're talking to our friend, if we're talking to our family, if we're saying what's going on, we don't say depression, anxiety, headache, body ache. I mean, it's usually, let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you a story. And so usually we situate problems and the alternatives to them within stories.
Yes.
And so it seemed to me that you were going that direction.
Yeah, that is very much the direction. The idea in this theory, thank you for your articulating of it, is that we have this kind of, this is completely out of mind-body bridging theory. The idea is that we have a depressor inside that is actively kind of sifting through life events and taking us down the rabbit hole of distress, and that's associated with central, nervous system activation, like sympathetic nervous system activation, and that if we're able to step back from the canvas, that we have these kind of repeating, you almost might want to say archetypal storylines. Like I'll share one that I just came out of a conversation with. Here's a storyline that I grew up with, Michael, that's been there, and it's identifiable. And I would give some variation on its specifics to you in a conversation. Here's a storyline: is I grew up thinking that I was too much. I was too much. And that would be applied to too much needful for human contact, too much curious, too much critical, just kind of ... And so that becomes a repetitive storyline. And I might come to you and I might say, Michael, let's say we're classmates. I'm really pissed off because the professor shut me down right now and says I'm always interrupting or something like that. And what it might bring up, if I were more or less conscious with my friend Michael, is to say, I wasn't intending to derail the class. I was asking what I felt like was an important question. And that comes up a lot for me. I don't know if it comes up more for me than other people, but I'm in a class and I want to learn. And if I shut that down, especially habitually, I probably won't learn that much, or, something like that. So there's the storyline in that is Bob's too much, Bob's too curious, Bob's too critical. And there's a specific experience of that. And the piece that we've been playing with the last day or two is, what difference does it make if I come to you, for example, and share the story and share it out of a relatively calm body? Almost more like, what does that allow for, versus come to you and say, I'm so fucking pissed off I can't see straight, and try to rally you against the professor, which it has its place sometimes too. But it's like playing with, where is there give in this situation around these so-called storylines or narratives? Yeah.
So how might it be beneficial, or where might there be some give if we are able to approach that, or begin to retell that story or share that story with a calm body state?
Yeah. And maybe the way I was looking at it with this is more internally, and it certainly would be external. Like if I share the story with you, but it'd be like, it's like trying to develop a more nuanced awareness of what goes on inside between an event outside and my reaction. It's like breaking that down in terms of trying to look at the narrative of it, even trying to look at the physiological portion, and where do we have some capacity to leverage that so that we don't suffer so much. You know, people might say, and I've certainly felt this in my life, that I'm victimized by life, you know, life circumstance. And what would it be like to imagine that there's some intervening variables? There's shit that can happen in my life that I don't like, but it doesn't have to translate like a one-to-one correspondence with suffering. It's something like that. We're being good Buddhists here, or not, Michael?
Yeah, right. You're like, come on, man.
Don't make me hit you.
Yeah.
Damn it. If you meet the non-Buddhist on the road, kill him, right? I'm just messing with you, brother.
Well, and I think ultimately it's like, how might a mindfulness practice help us approach this negativity?
That's really what we're talking
about. And retell a different story, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe even we're not retelling a different story, as though that how do we then work through that story?
Yeah, good. Yeah. So hold a different relationship to a very familiar story, you know? Yeah.
So changing our relationship, in fact, to that story.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Very much. That's very much it.
Well, how might the mindfulness practice help us change our relationship to that, as well as then inform how we retell the story to others, and so how then it affects the relationships that are important to us.
Yeah, I like this last piece, Michael, and I've been thinking about it in the last week. I had a conversation with Colleen about this, and I had a conversation with somebody else about this too. I'm so incredibly sensitive to people's anger, and it doesn't have to be at me. It's just the presence of aggressive energy. And I took this that highly sensitive person test this week. I took it a few years ago. I took it. I scored 100%. That's not a good thing, man. It was like, freaking, can't there be some exception? It was like 100%. And so I feel like I'm not a semi-permeable. I'm a fully permeable membrane to somebody being pissed off, and I value being pissed off. It's counter to my values. I think there's a place for aggression. For example, if you in my presence and we're pissed off, I just want to be with you. The fact is, it really impacts me physiologically. I just have to kind of find my way with that. And it's not you being pissed off at me. It's just you being pissed off. And by the way, I'm no saint. I can be angry in a nanosecond too. So it's something like, is there a way to calm my body so I can be friends with you as you're angry, or be with my distress about an interaction and be calm enough to not lose my shit? And because I don't find that pleasant either. It's not about not being angry, but it's like having some bandwidth around how that anger manifests. And that would just be one feeling. I mean, we could talk about fear or shame or sorrow. We could talk about any one of those things. It's like, it's not about becoming Teflon. It's about becoming flexible. You know?
Yeah. It's not getting rid of it. It's changing our relationship.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that maybe, I don't know if this is what you meant by like the depressor, or is that certain emotions or experiences we might have a higher level of sensitivity to, whether it be anger, like you were just talking about, or fear, or that anything that might reinforce the narrative that I'm not good enough, or that I'm not this enough, or I'm too much of this, like you were saying. I mean, because then, you know, when you were saying this earlier, like that you're too much, and the implication there is not in a good way, but then something else could tell you you're not enough. And so then there's this, well, where's the sweet spot, you know, and where's the measuring stick? And there's always this comparison, and and whose stick is it? Where did it come from? Who's, you know, have others use it, and now I'm using it on myself because it's been used. And then, so then am I using it when others aren't, but it feels like they are?
Yeah, it gets really crazy, and it does it very quickly, doesn't it? So we walk around. I'll tell you, in early recovery, Michael, there's a good example. The first time I experienced this in a like a continuing way. I'd had moments of this across my life, but never where it was chronic. When I first got into recovery and had completely thrashed the hell out of my career, my relationships, my finances, just everything went to hell in a handbasket. And I ended up in a hospital in a detox unit, just the bottom of the barrel. And it wasn't all negative, by the way, but I do want to own up to the part that was negative. And the part that was, well, the part that I suffered is when I got out, I had this experience of looking at other people, assuming that they were judging me because I had been judged. I'd been kicked out of my profession, you know, but it's the first time I ever was in a situation where when I looked at people, and most of my friends were in the same field I was in, they're psychologists, I couldn't but think that they were seeing me the way that I had been judged, which was now the way I was seeing me. It got all confused, and that went on without remission for some months. And I was scared that I would never be free of that because it just caused me to contract inside. I just felt such mortal shame for sure. And I'd never experienced that where, I mean, I was just full on, I mean this, and I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way towards myself. I was just full on paranoid. It's full on paranoid in the sense of paranoeo, like knowing from the outs, looking at myself from the outside. That's what paranoeo is, and that's what I was. So it's like that. It can go there.
It's funny that you. I was thinking even right before you started talking, I didn't know which direction you're going in. Was around shame because it's at least the way I've experienced shame is that it's not as intense of an emotion like anger. And so especially if you ask someone, is it shame? Likely to say no, because it's kind of not as intense and kind of is more subtle. And, you know, which I think is also the why it can be so damaging, because you don't even hardly realize that it's there acting on you in some way. And I think
here's a crazy paradox, Michael, is that I really agree with you. Shame is not so obvious. You know, that image I shared earlier, the unthought known. You feel something in the middle of your gut, but you can't really describe it. So it's got that kind of transparency. It's hard to see it, hard to grab a hold. It's like quicksilver. But in the research that's been done on human emotion, we talked about this before, I believe, is that if you look at unpleasant emotions like anger, like fear, like sadness, for most people, those are unpleasant emotions. Shame is another one that's unpleasant. Shame registers the highest cortisol elevation of all of those emotions. And so it's the least tangible, and it's actually the most distressful. It's the craziest thing. And so it's you're really in a bind with shame because you can't talk about it. You can't even grab a hold of it, and it's destroying you from the inside.
Insidious, I think, is a good word for
Insidious is a perfect word, my friend.
Yeah. But I mean, I would say that it took me maybe let's see. I'm going to say actually 2 years to know. I don't know. It was 18 months to 2 years to notice, to be able to name what it was that I was experiencing and how it was limiting me. And for me, it was liberating just noticing or figuring out that what it was. I felt like renewed, and although there was still lots of work to do from there, but just in noticing it initially, I could feel it physically lift.
Right with you. You know, I'm going to say something really funny, but it's not intended to be cute. I think it's why it's so important for therapists like you and whatever I am. Whatever I am these days. I think it's really important for us to be really smart. I don't think I've ever said that once, but it's smart in this way. It's like to have a differentiated vocabulary such that when a client comes in to meet with us, or if the client is ourselves, if we can name something, it doesn't vanquish it. I like how Ken Wilber talks about it. It's like half the battle won is just to name this stuff. There's such a power in that. And now you've got some traction maybe to work on it, but my God, it's just that alone. It's amazing to me in the work that I do with clients talking about addiction. When I talk about the biology of addiction, which you know that we both care about, that you can just see people having epiphanies, having this shit named. I mean, it's incredible to me, the power of that. The power of naming.
You know what? And I've read what you're talking about in terms of naming it across different theories. That most will give value to this. Some of them more explicitly than others.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's if we're gonna figure out what we're navigating here, I think to be able to name, like, how can you navigate through something without being able to put some sort of name to it? And then I think it also creates some universality to it. And that if there's a name for it, then I'm maybe not alone in
this. Perfect. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful connection, Michael. Yeah. Makes me think, as I'm listening to you as well, is that in social psychology, one of the ironclad correlations is between cognitive ambiguity, not knowing which way's up, and anxiety. And so just that intervention alone, if you can help me as my therapist to name my experience with more articulation than I have, and probably by definition, I'm in a fog with it. If you can help me do that, that intervention alone is going to reduce my blood pressure, my anxiety quotient, really exponentially. It's really powerful what we're talking about. Yeah, I like that very much. And I love the universality that you just named. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Well, when you said cognitive ambiguity, for some reason, I don't know if you've been surfing or in the surf. Yeah, I mean, you're a swimmer, right? And so, I mean, I'm sure you've been tossed around in the surf before, and you literally didn't know which way was up. I mean, underneath the water. No. And that is a rather distressing feeling. The cognitive ambiguity, that feeling that I've even like just kind of popped up.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. In drumming, we have a version of that. It's where the drummer loses one. So if a music is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're playing this complex rhythm, 30-second notes all over the place, sometimes you move and you're playing against the rhythm. You're doing stuff to fiddle with the rhythm, stretching it and so on. Even the best drummers, even the very best drummers, will occasionally come up and they will have lost one. You have no idea. And if you have a sense of it, it's like you have no idea. Where's the downbeat? I don't even have the side beat. So it's like getting caught in a really big wave and you don't know which way is up. It's a very uncomfortable feeling.
I like that, lost one.
Yeah, you lost one. I lost one.
And I think that, I mean, even as a therapist, I mean, there are times that I feel like, hey, I feel pretty good with it. And then there are times like I go, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I've lost one. Now I have a name for it.
I've lost one. You know what's cool, Michael? We're gonna have to wind down. We just got started up. What's cool is if I'm seeing you, if you're my therapist, let me tell you a story. I'll tell you a story, and I want to tie it to you as a therapist. My favorite drummer of all time was a phenomenon. At age 17, he joined Miles Davis back in the early 60s. Miles Davis had the premier jazz group in the 60s, and he hired Tony Williams out of Boston. He was literally 17. He was in high school. Tony Williams went on to become the most revered jazz drummer for many of all time. But he started at that age, and I listened to everything he's done across his entire career. Tony Williams died tragically early. He was only 50 when he died, about 20 years ago. I found out when I was teaching at Pepperdine. A friend called me, and I just went into class and burst into tears. He had a gallbladder operation that went sideways. He died. There was no good reason. He just died. But I got to see Tony Williams any number of times across the years, and I used to see him every time he came to Los Angeles. He lived up in the Bay Area more recently. And Tony would do this. Tony was just this incredible drummer. He had a rhythmic conception that was beyond any other drummer. Still, he's kind of seen that way. Tony would go down into a drumming, and he'd be playing with his jazz band, and he'd come up and he'd lose one. And I love this, and I remember this as clear as a bell. He'd come up, and that he has no idea where one is. He'd look at the audience, and he'd get this big smile on his face and just go, and he'd go, bam, and he'd be back on it. He was never ashamed of losing one, because if you're Tony Williams or any other maestro of an instrument, you know what? You've earned the right to risk fucking up for the sake of creativity. And it was so clearly cool that he was doing that. My point to you was, as a therapist, if I was seeing you as a therapist, if you would risk with me getting twisted upside down in a wave with me, what a huge gift that might be. If all I've ever been around is people categorizing me with such certainty, to be in the presence of somebody who would risk uncertainty and even expose that vulnerably with me, that might be the most important intervention you could possibly bring me. Would you please be confused with me?
Yeah, I really love, and it's actually something I've been thinking a lot about lately. And in some ways, some guys that I have watched on video a lot, kind of doing therapy, and they express, it was just around this topic, is that they would come to some point, and it was these guys that I kind of watched and really admired for some time, and it kind of gave me permission to do. And what they said was, I at some point realizing that they had lost one, and would say, I don't know what to ask next. Like I really don't. Because I know I've been in that place before.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And it seems like more lately than usually, like for a long, lots of times I don't really have a hard time thinking, but lately it seems like I've been losing one a bit more. And then to say, you know what, I can't, I don't know what to say now. Like I can't, I'm not sure. Give me a second, and I think that it would be doing exactly what you're talking about, Bob. So really, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
I'll reference somebody for you. You can check him out on this. Robert Stollero, the LA psychoanalyst, used to use his textbooks in fact, I had a whole course on Robert Stollero's work at Pepperdine. In fact, he was on the faculty at Pepperdine. One of the cool things about being on the faculty at Pepperdine is one of the catalogs had me, Bob Weathers, and on one of me was Robert Stollero, who was my idol as a therapist. On the other side was Joseph Wolpe, the father of behavior therapy. I thought, how amazingly cool is that? I've got Robert Stollero and Joseph Wolpe, and there's little Bobby Weathers in between. That's just for shits and giggles.
How old were you then?
What's that? Oh, I was 35.
How old are you?
35. It's pretty heady stuff. Yeah. Robert Stollero, he talks about this concept throughout his writings, and I'd reference it to you in the spirit of all that you're talking about with other theoreticians and practitioners. He calls it fallibilism. That's his term for it, and it's just what we're talking about. It's like for the therapist to court being fallible, including I don't know where one is. I don't know the next question to ask. That's such an incredible gift, and it entrusts your client with your vulnerability, your humanness, and I like what the founder of self-psychology was 𝗡𝗄 𝗏. He says he has different he talks different relationships between the therapist and the client that are instrumental, but he says the very first one you need to have is you need to have what he called twinship, and he said by that your client needs to know that you're both human beings. If you don't have that, then all the other stuff, mirroring, none of that stuff makes any sense. And part of that is that we're all humans, that we all make mistakes, we all get confused. And so just to risk that. So I used to ask students to consider the batting average of the best batter in baseball, and what was it? They'd say, well, somewhere between 300 and 400. And I says, that allows you a lot of errors to still be the best therapist.
Yeah. Well, that probably brings us full circle and probably good with the timing, but counter to manualized therapy, because manualized therapy might not have you embracing that idea. Yeah,
that's good. Thank you for tying that in. It does tie into this whole piece of how can we find our way with negativity, and what you and I are modeling right now, Michael. I so love our time together. We're modeling an alternative narrative to being too much or being too little or having fucked up, having lost one, being upside down in a wave. And it's a different narrative. And it's like, yeah, wouldn't that be nice to hold life with this kind of lightness, hold my errors with lightness, be grateful for the successes or the arrow going in the bullseye, and the other ones just go, well, I'll finish the story. And I'm saying this to you as my friend. I was teaching a course at Pepperdine on the history of psychology, history and systems. And I remember one time I was writing on the board. We were studying Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. So we took it all the way back to the ancient Greeks and kind of went forward in terms of philosophy and psychology. And I was way into whatever I was writing. I didn't typically do this. This is a fallibilism thing. And I turned around and I looked at the class, and they were in kind of a horseshoe size. It was about 25 doctoral students in psychology. And I remember looking at them, and it just busted up. And I said, does anybody give a fucking shit about what I'm talking about? With the implication that you probably don't and you probably shouldn't. It comes to my mind, you know, how it comes up in our lives as therapists, in this case, as a teacher, as a supervisor, as a partner, as a parent, as somebody in recovery, as somebody not in recovery. Couldn't we adopt a sense of humor about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle?
Do you remember how that was received?
Oh, they just howled because we had a safety in the class. It was like, who says that? You know, it was just a realization. It was like me being like a little boy, all earnest about Socrates. I look around and people are like, they're just kind of like, they're just like a deer in the headlights, the whole class. And I saw that, and it just busted me up. And it was well deserved. They should be a deer in the headlights, man. You got to help us, brother. Throw us a bone with this stuff, man.
Yeah, you became aware that you were given lots more shits about it than they were.
And there was something about it that was hilarious. I have another client years ago. He brought in a dream. He was a therapist. He brought in a dream to me, and I was in the training program at the Jung Institute at the time. You want to talk about earnest, and so I devoured that like a vulture. And he stopped me at some point, and he says, Bob, you care about this dream a whole fucking lot more than I do. And that's not okay with me. I was totally embarrassed, Michael. He said it because it was so right on. In this case, it was like I just got red in the face, sweat, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I paused and I said, David, I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right. Jesus, what is going on here? I never did forget that. Never did forget that. That was a failure. That was a mistake that formed the rest of my career around certain kinds of ways of approaching not just dreams, but clinical material. Let me make sure that I'm honoring your separateness and your intensity. Let me not just come in like a bull in a china closet and go, we're going to go for that complex. We're going to go for, it's just like, what the heck? Just chill, Bob.
Well, it seemed like you, just like the drummer you were talking about, was it Williams?
Yeah, Tony Williams. Tony
Williams is that you realized you lost one and just got back to it with a bit of confidence. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if confidence is the right word, but maybe something like that.
Yeah, I think the first instance in the class was just hilarity. We just laughed our heads off at how ridiculous it was, and then we went on. I loved that class. I can still picture the students in that class. The instance with the client was totally embarrassing to me. I've had a few of those experiences for sure. Loved early, but there was grace in the relationship. First of all, he was just himself. He made me some important supervision there. So I didn't respond like Tony Williams by smiling at the audience. I actually broke out in a hot sweat, but we repaired it, and I was grateful to him, and I never forgot that. I've had that with my own therapist down through the years. Just once or twice had to say something that was my version of that, and his responsiveness might be one of the most significant gifts he gave me. His not moving into judgment, his not moving away, his not minimizing anything that I said, coming in the next week and is saying, I thought about what you said all week long, Bob, and you're absolutely right, and I apologize. It's so meaningful to me. So meaningful to me. Wow.
Yeah. Repair.
Michael, I got to scoot, and you probably do too. We could talk all night. I wish we could. Thank you for this conversation. It never goes where we planned, thank goodness. We didn't plan for it to go anywhere. We planned for it to go someplace that we don't know. It went to the unthought known.
Yeah, we held it lightly.
Yeah, we did. Thank you, brother. Much love.
It's a pleasure, Bob. Yeah, much love to you as well.
Wish you well. You take good care, all right, my friend?
All right, you too.
All right. Good night. Good night.
Good night.